Welcome to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Elizabeth. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello, everyone. So 2 years of dry summers have hit our pasture areas pretty hard. Stand has undoubtedly suffered, which often leads to the question of pasture renovation. Having a good stand obviously improves forage availability. It also helps keep weeds out that can be detrimental to animal health. And of course, we want to avoid building up that seed bank, which can be a challenge for years to come. So today we're going to discuss how and when to renovate pastures and do it properly. Joining us to provide insight is Dr. Emma Matcham. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Emma, and I am the Forage Extension Agronomist for Ohio State. I started here in January.
Yes, so a very new addition to our team of specialists with Ohio State Extension. We are happy to have you and excited with a lot of the work that you have put out already.
And while she's a new face to Extension, she's not a new face to Ohio State. We've been working with Emma for a number of years, going back to when she was just a little baby undergraduate student at Farm Science Review. So she has a long history of helping out, and we're so glad to have her on board.
Yeah, I'm originally from Northern Ohio. I spent the last couple years in Florida, where I had a research and extension program focused on nutrient cycling. Before that, I was in Wisconsin for grad school. But it's great to be back in Ohio, and thanks for having me today.
So we want to start off with talking about pasture renovation and that first step. We're guessing that it's probably having to make that decision to renovate your pasture. So how do you go about deciding it's time?
This can be a really personal decision, and the first thing I ask folks is whether their pasture is meeting their needs. I don't like walking a pasture with someone and just assuming that the problems I'm seeing compared to optimal productivity are something that's really impacting their operation. So if you are at the point where your pastures are noticeably less productive than they have been in years past, you're noticing that you need to supplement with hay more, or they're otherwise not meeting your needs. You're spending more on weed control than you want to. Those are all signs that it's time to renovate. Other things that I look for are bare dirt. It's a little bit hard to assess at this time of year, depending on how recently your pastures were grazed or if your hay fields were cut, just because we've had some regrowth in the last couple weeks. But keep an eye on those bare dirt areas and notice if any patches of bare dirt or weedy areas are starting to expand. You can also measure pasture productivity using a few different metrics throughout a whole growing season. And some of the ways to do that are grazing sticks, pleat meters, or just clipping a known area of the field, so 1 foot by 1 foot in a couple spots throughout your pasture, drying out that material and estimating how much biomass is available. But honestly, the first step is, are you noticing weeds or bare spots expanding? And is your pasture no longer meeting your operations needs?
So is there a key time frame of how often pastures need to be renovated?
Not really. I wish that we could make a lot of management decisions based on a calendar, and especially in the forage world, we can't. We have some tall fescue pastures throughout Kentucky and Ohio that have been going strong for 40, 50 years, with very little need for stand replacement. They might need some legume introduction and interseeding. They might need some fertilizer and weed management, but few other inputs. We also have some pastures that do need replacement more often. That can be due to soil type, that could be due to management. And there are some species of forages, some pasture mixes that might need to be replaced more often. So anywhere from 2 to 3 years to 50 years, wide range.
So Emma, where does soil health play a role in renovation?
Yeah, soil health is a big topic. The most important aspect of soil health for making pasture renovation decisions, in my mind, is fertility. Both pH and potassium levels have a strong impact on our crop's ability to take up other nutrients and then overwinter, especially for pastures that include alfalfa. There are some types of alfalfa that are grazed, and then any of our alfalfa hay fields. That potassium level, managing it before establishing a new stand and then managing it throughout the lifetime of your stand can have a huge impact on winter survival. And then on the pH side, that's important for all of our pastures. But that target pH is going to depend a little bit on whether you have legumes in your pasture or if it's just a grass stand. And having pH managed well can really improve our nutrient cycling and nutrient availability, which allows our pastures to grow effectively during the growing season and have sufficient root growth going into winter, which is important for stand persistence. But of the soil health parameters, I'm most concerned about pH and soil test potassium.
So pulling a soil test before we get started, looking at recommendations then of where that ideally should be before seeding.
Yeah, we do recommend making management decisions for pH and potassium before new seedings for pastures, especially for pH. We want to be making our lime applications at least 3 months before we plan on making a seeding if there is a large change in pH that needs to occur. Just because lime takes a while to react and lime takes longer to react in dry conditions. Lime also takes longer to react when the particle size is a bit larger. So if you have a pasture you plan to renovate that has a pH below 6 especially, make sure that you are managing lime in advance of needing to seed again. At least 3 months, 6 months is great.
So lime is a great thing to consider. Are there any other preparation steps that you should take when you're getting ready to reseed a pasture?
Yes, but I'm an extension agronomist, so I will use the classic answer for this question. It depends. Uh, it's going to vary a lot based on why you need to renovate your pasture, whether you're replacing the whole stand or going in and interseeding something into an existing pasture. Weed control is helpful if you have weeds that are going to seed and you plan on renovating next year. Try and keep your weed pressure down the year before renovating if you can. And then I really encourage folks to plan ahead so that you can have time to pick some varieties and look at seed availability. We've had some big mergers and business closures on the forage seed retailer side in the last year, but also going back 5, 10 years. Uh, so just planning in advance to have seed. And then a lot of folks will need to plan a couple weeks or months out in order to get a drill if they plan on using a drill for renovating their pasture. A lot of soil and water conservation districts have those available for rent, but you do need to get on the schedule ahead of time, especially since they are in demand after 2 very dry years.
So what's the ideal timing for renovation?
The ideal timing for most of our perennial forages in Ohio is going to be either a spring or a fall seeding. In most of Ohio, we're looking at any time in the month of April for alfalfa, uh, and then anytime in the month of August, as long as we have enough rainfall for seeds to emerge. That's true for like our tall fescue and a lot of our other common cool season grasses as well. April and August.
So start thinking now about some of those things you mentioned, acquiring seed, preparing the soil, lime, for spring if you want to do it this coming season.
Yep.
So still have plenty of time to do that.
Yeah, and for folks that aren't interested in replacing their whole pasture stand, but do have more bare soil than they'd like, or their species mix has changed in the pasture, some of the options for renovating your pasture that require a little bit less soil prep and can be a little bit less expensive include frost seeding. So if you want to go out and frost seed legumes, the best timing for that is going to be February. We want to make sure that the seed is on the ground before we get into freeze thaw cycles at the end of February, since that's what's going to help improve seed soil contact. And the great news about frost seeding is that it doesn't require much equipment. You don't need to rent the drill. It does, our clovers will perform better and fix more nitrogen if your pH is well managed. But frequently they'll still emerge even if the pH is on the low end.
You mentioned legumes and clovers there, so the best species for frost seeding being clovers.
Yeah. Yep. Red clover, white clover, they'll both perform well with frost seeding. There are folks that have had success with some of the grasses as well, but grass seed it's not very dense, so it doesn't get good seed soil contact with frost seeding in those conditions.
Thinking about if I want to establish a grass seed, then what are some methods? You mentioned a drill, um, no-till drill, or preparing the soil beforehand. Can you just give us a couple pointers on how we decide what the best method of seed establishment might be for our situation?
Yeah, great question. For folks that are interested in interseeding into an established pasture, a no-till drill is going to be your best option. It doesn't require tillage ahead of time, which means that we're going to disturb the remaining plants in our pasture a little bit less. Uh, and if we have a harsh spring or summer, those more mature plants have a root system that can help retain soil as our newly planted seed starts to emerge and grow. So a no-till drill doesn't require a whole lot of soil prep. Make sure you calibrate the drill correctly. That's a mistake I see pretty often. Uh, and read the manufacturer's directions because some no-till drills can handle mixing multiple types of seed pretty successfully. Others have a real narrow range of seed sizes that they can handle simultaneously. So think about that when you're looking at your seed selection. Is this a drill that can have multiple species planted at once, or is it not? At which point, pick one species to plant with that no-till drill. Otherwise, pay attention to just how moist your soil is and whether it's fit for planting that day. I know that can be hard if you're borrowing equipment or working off farm job. But it is important for seed establishment. If we don't have good seed soils, contact the seed won't emerge well. If you're planning on totally replacing the stand, tillage is helpful and it gives you more machinery options. So if you have a pasture that you're replacing the whole stand in, you've either killed the previous pasture before winter and have bare dirt, or you are terminating and then planting in the spring. Keep an eye on any of the herbicides that you used during that termination process. Make sure that there is enough of a plant back window to what you're planning to establish next. Uh, you'd be amazed by how many calls I get about that one. And then make sure that your ground is prepped in a way that matches your planter's needs. So if you have a no-till drill and you're doing a full stand replacement, you might not need to do a passive tillage ahead of time. If you are broadcasting and then running some sort of light tillage over that for seed incorporation, you might want to do a little bit of tillage before you broadcast the seed, just so that there's fewer clumps during that light tillage pass at the end. But it varies a lot by soil texture. It varies a lot by machinery, so it's hard to make a universal recommendation for how to establish new forages.
No, I think that was a great overview.
Yeah, you've given us some really great recommendations around the mechanisms for planting. When we look at it from an agronomic perspective, are there some species selection recommendations you have as far as pairing species or selecting species when you're renovating these pastures?
Yes and no. A lot of combinations work well together. It depends on your goals as well. Some really common mixes in Ohio are like an alfalfa orchard grass or a red clover timothy, and then some sort of legume with tall fescue. Those are all very common forage perennial mixtures that we see in Ohio. The Ohio Agronomy Guide does have some other recommendations for mixtures in there. For most operations, having some sort of legume and then some sort of grass is a good starting point, especially when you're establishing a new pasture.
With the summer that we've had lately, drought has been, well, really the last 2 seasons. Drought has been something that's been at the forefront of Ohio farmers' minds. Are there any recommendations you have for stands that maybe are more drought tolerant than our traditional options?
Yeah, there are two categories of recommendations I have for improving drought resilience at the farm scale. Both take a little bit of commitment and some intentional management. One is tall fescue of our forage perennial grasses that are cool season grasses. That is the species that will have some better drought persistence. The challenge with tall fescue for grazing is that you do have some endophyte challenges and fescue toxicosis. There are novel endophyte tall fescues that have some of that drought resistance trait that we see with like a Kentucky 31 unimproved tall fescue, where you don't have the fescue toxicosis risk when it gets very hot out for animals. But the endophyte-free tall fescue is going to be just as sensitive to drought as a lot of our other cool season grasses. So that's an option. Just remember to monitor your animals, maybe pull them off of that grass while it's very hot out so that the vasoconstriction that comes from the endophytes in tall fescue doesn't become a limiting factor for animal performance. The other category of recommendations, actually, let me go back to tall fescue briefly. Tall fescue with fescue toxicosis can limit animal health and performance, but if you pull animals off of it when you have a hot drought period, the pasture itself is going to be very persistent. So that's why tall fescue has been all over the fescue belt for so long, and we just keep coming back to it. It will recover from a drought a bit more than some of our other cool season grasses. Another option that I think more farms should consider, but is a very long-term commitment, is establishing some warm season perennial grasses somewhere on your property. Those warm season grasses are much more water efficient and their optimal performance is above 75 degrees Fahrenheit. In Ohio, we're seeing more and more days that get very hot during summer. And our cool season grasses, tall fescue, orchard grass, timothy, none of those are going to be very productive at that time of year. And warm season grasses can help fill that summer slump period and allow us to continue growing more biomass at that time of year. The challenge is that any of our perennial warm season grasses in this region take about 24 months before you can graze them. The establishment window for those is just very long. We do have some new research projects going on between my lab and Marilia Chiavicato's lab, looking at how we can establish mixtures of cool season and warm season grasses in the same pasture. We see them on some farms, they do exist, and they exist in natural prairies. But we do not have good establishment recommendations for folks that want to have those species mixtures in the same pasture and create that. So right now, our primary recommendation is if you want some warm season perennial grasses on your farm as a drought resistant summer grazing option, it is best to have a designated pasture for that and spend the time up front to establish them before you start grazing.
Yeah, 24 months, I can see the hesitation there from some farmers. That's a big commitment, especially if you're limited on space.
Yep, for our land limited farmers, that's a huge limitation. If you're
Mhm.
interested in warm season grasses but don't have 24 months, another option is warm season grass annuals. Some of the annuals that perform well include sorghum Sudan grass, really high biomass, lots of genetic improvement in sorghum Sudan grass varieties recently. We have it when sorghum Sudan grass was first introduced in this region, most of it was bred in Oklahoma and Texas, and it didn't perform well in a really humid region. Now we have more and more varieties that were bred in the Midwest. So we have a lot of success with sorghum Sudan grass recently here in Ohio. Millet is also an option. Millet's great because it doesn't have a prussic acid risk when we get later into the season where there's a frost risk. Lots of options for warm season grasses. Teff is one I've gotten some questions about recently. There's actually a new Ohio Line fact sheet about teff. But if you're interested in warm season grasses and don't have 24 months to commit to establishment, an annual might be a better fit for you.
So now that we have established our pasture or reseeded it, what's our next management steps? When can animals be returned to grazing? What are some things we should keep in mind to make sure that our investment and time and seeding it really pays off?
Yeah. Establishment success is a murky definition. We don't have a solid calendar date that you should always wait in certain establishment situations. And we don't have a good benchmark that's one size fits all. The characteristics you're looking for before you reintroduce animals is going to be the appropriate plant height for grazing for that species. So depending on your species, it might be 8 inches, it might be 24 inches. And then we want the roots to be sufficiently developed that if animals start walking through it, they're not going to disturb the new seedlings. Usually in a new pasture, something where we cleared out the whole old stand and we're planting from scratch, that's going to take longer. And in a situation where you frost seeded in February, you might be able to reintroduce animals in May or June pretty comfortably. One option for folks that have the ability or can contract with someone with equipment is to cut hay for the first cutting after establishing a new pasture or renovating. That can help preserve the fragile roots of new seedlings. But I know that not everybody has that option.
So, do you have any major pieces of advice that you want to share for farmers who are considering renovating their pastures that we can wrap up with?
The big one is just patience. It takes longer than you expect. My main recommendation is patience. It's going to take longer than you expect. Also, once you go through the effort of establishing pasture, keeping an eye on your soil fertility levels moving forward and weed control. You went through all the effort of establishing a new pasture or renovating an existing one, and fertility and weed control are the 2 practices you can do moving forward that help protect that investment so you don't have to renovate as often.
Yeah, I would second that on soil fertility. I've seen a lot of soil tests over the years from pastures that are really, really low. If you're grazing, you are returning a lot of those nutrients, but not all of them. So if it's been a long time since you've taken a soil test, I would recommend you get on a regular schedule, every 4 or 5 years, just to check that.
Yeah, especially for folks where they're cutting hay from different pastures in different years. Keeping track of where you've harvested hay as opposed to grazed is helpful for soil fertility planning, since when we're grazing, those animals are returning about 80% of the nutrients back to the soil. But in a hay harvest situation, you're removing all of the nutrients with the hay.
All right, Emma, thank you for your time. Are there any resources you'd like to make our listeners aware of?
Yeah, there is a new fact sheet on the Ohio Line website called Giving New Life to Tired Pastures. This was written by Dean Krieger, Christine Gelly, and Ted Wiseman. I think it's a great resource. It goes through some of the recommendations that we talked about, and it also has recommendations for the NRCS pasture condition score sheet, which can just help you benchmark your pasture productivity and help you keep an eye on when your pasture condition is starting to decline and you need to start planning for some renovation activities. So again, that title is Giving New Life to Tired Pastures.
Awesome. We will link that up in the show notes and also link up your bio so they can reach out to you or see what you have going on in the future too. Emma has been a great contributor to the corn newsletter as well. So, several of our guests have mentioned keeping an eye on the corn newsletter. So another reason to subscribe to that or check it each week.
Yeah, we actually had one this week on forage management after drought.
There you go. All right, Emma, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Agronomy and Farm Management Podcast. Join us again in 2 weeks for our next episode.
Hey, podcast listeners, just a reminder to give us a like or subscribe so you know when we release new episodes. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave us a review also. We appreciate the comments.